Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive. We're going deep into Genesis. Chapters 1 through 3,
Oh, yeah.
some seriously profound stuff. We're talking creation, purpose, relationships,
Hmm.
sin, suffering, the whole human experience.
It's all there.
But don't worry, because we're going to be talking about hope and redemption too.
Right.
We've got these excerpts from a text. They're going to help guide our discussion today.
Okay.
Let's dive in.
Sound good.
Okay, so Genesis 1, the creation story. That famous line, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Right.
It's more than just poetic, don't you think?
I think so.
It suggests that the universe wasn't just a random accident. It was a deliberate act of creation.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that resonate with you at all?
Absolutely. I mean, especially in today's world,
Oh, yeah.
where it's so easy to get overwhelmed by everything that's going on. I mean, chaos.
Yeah?
It's everywhere. And this idea that there was this intentional creation,
Mm-hmm.
it just offers a sense of grounding, you know?
Oh, for sure. Like when your to-do list
Exactly.
is a mile long, and the world feels like it's spinning out of control.
Oh, yeah.
You can remember that there's this grand design to it all, and
Yeah.
I don't know about you,
Mm-hmm.
but I find that pretty comforting.
It is comforting. Very much so.
Okay, so Genesis 1.2627.
Okay.
This is where we're introduced to this idea that humanity was created in the image of God,
Right.
which is huge.
It's huge.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's really had a profound impact on how we understand human value and dignity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like everyone is born with this inherent worth, no matter what.
I love that, this inherent, you are valuable sticker.
Yes.
But if everyone's created with this inherent worth, how do we explain all the inequality and the division that we see in the world?
That's a great question. And, you know, this text suggests that maybe all of those problems stem from forgetting this fundamental truth about ourselves.
It's our inherent worth.
Yeah, our shared divine image. If we truly grasped the weight of that,
Right.
wouldn't it change the way we treat each other?
Yeah. It would definitely make you stop and think.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, relationships.
Yes.
This is such a central theme in Genesis 2.
Yeah.
When God creates Eve, he says it is not good for man to be alone.
Right.
What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it highlights this inherent human need for connection, for community. It's like we're designed for partnership, to care for one another.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of ironic
What's that?
that in today's world where everybody is like hyper-connected,
Oh, yeah.
so many people feel isolated and alone.
Totally. It's like we have thousands of social media connections, but
Right.
we can still feel lonely. So it's like those virtual connections, they can't replace real face-to-face relationships.
No, they can't. What do you think?
I totally agree. Genesis 2 is all about authentic, meaningful relationships.
Yeah.
And as we move into Genesis 3, things take kind of a darker turn.
Yeah.
We're introduced to the fall, right?
Right.
This is a challenging chapter, but
It is.
I think it offers some really crucial insights into what it means to be human.
I agree.
So in Genesis 3, we're introduced to sin
Mm-hmm.
and suffering.
Yeah.
It all starts with Adam and Eve's disobedience in the garden.
Right.
It's like this one act had this ripple effect that is still felt today.
It is. And it's interesting, you know,
Yes,
to consider the fall not just as like a historical event,
Mm-hmm.
but as something that still continues to play out in our lives
Oh, yeah.
today.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, think about it. How often do you find yourself
Oh, my God.
making choices you regret or experiencing brokenness
All the time.
in your relationship?
Yeah. Like we're constantly grappling with the consequences of those choices made back in the garden.
Yeah.
And how do we even begin to deal with this legacy of the fall?
Yeah.
I mean, it can feel really overwhelming.
It is a heavy concept. But you know, remember that glimmer of hope we talked about in
Yeah.
Genesis 3.15? The promise of redemption?
Yes. The seed of hope. It's like this prophecy, this glimmer of light in the darkness.
Right. And I think for Christians, this points to the coming of Jesus, the ultimate defeat of evil. But even for those who don't subscribe to that belief system,
Right.
the concept of redemption,
Yeah,
it's still really powerful.
it is.
It suggests that no matter how broken things become,
Right.
there's always this potential for healing.
Exactly. And that potential for healing
Yeah.
is something that we can actively work towards.
I love that.
You know? And it starts with acknowledging the brokenness, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
So it's not just about recognizing the problems, but it's about taking responsibility
Yes,
for our part in them.
exactly.
That's a pretty challenging idea, but it makes sense.
It does.
It does.
And this is where the concept of repentance comes in.
Okay.
Repentance isn't just about feeling sorry for our mistakes.
Mhm.
It's about turning away from harmful patterns
Right.
and actively seeking change. Okay, so how does this apply to our lives today?
Mm-hmm.
What does repentance look like
Ah.
in a practical sense?
Well, imagine someone struggling with addiction.
Okay.
They've made choices that have led them down a destructive path,
Uh-huh.
and they just feel trapped,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So recognizing the destructive nature of their addiction,
Right.
that's the first step.
Okay.
And then comes the difficult but crucial work of turning away from those destructive behaviors
Mhm.
and seeking help.
Yeah.
This could be therapy,
Hmm.
it could be support groups,
Yeah.
or even just confiding in a trusted friend or family member.
So it's about recognizing the problem
Mm-hmm.
and then taking concrete steps
Yes.
to move toward healing.
Exactly.
I like that.
And it's not just about individual healing either.
Right.
It's about contributing to the healing of the world around us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So think about social injustice.
Okay.
It's not enough to just simply acknowledge that it exists.
Right.
We have to actively work to dismantle the systems and the structures that perpetuate it.
So applying this idea of repentance on a societal level
Mm-hmm.
could mean working for legislative change,
Yes.
supporting organizations fighting for equality,
Right.
or even just having difficult conversations with people in our own lives who hold prejudiced views.
Precisely. It's about acknowledging our complicity
Mm-hmm.
in systems of injustice and then taking concrete steps to create a more just and equitable world.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is. It's hard work.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
But it's work that aligns with this idea of redemption,
Mm-hmm.
of moving from brokenness towards wholeness.
So that makes me think about another theme from Genesis.
Okay.
Stewardship. In Genesis 1, God gives humanity dominion over the earth.
Mhm.
And, this has often been interpreted as a license to exploit the planet's resources.
Right.
But maybe there's a different way to look at it. What if
Right.
we see dominion not as domination,
Right.
but as a call to responsible caretaking? If we are made in the image of God,
Yeah.
and God is a creator who cares for his creation, shouldn't we be doing the same?
I think you're exactly right.
So that means being mindful of how we use natural resources, taking action to protect the environment,
Yes.
making sure that future generations
Right.
inherit a healthy planet. It's almost like we're being called to co-create with God
Yes.
in this ongoing work of creation.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Thank you.
And it connects back to this whole concept of redemption.
Mm-hmm.
We can choose to participate in the healing of the world,
Right.
both in our individual lives
Yeah.
and in the larger systems that shape our society.
We can be agents of restoration, working towards a future
Yeah.
where the consequences of the fall are mitigated by our
Mhm.
collective efforts.
That's right.
It sounds like a tall order, but it's also incredibly hopeful.
It is hopeful. And,
Yeah.
even though Genesis 3 introduces these ideas of sin and suffering,
Yeah.
the overall message is one of resilience
Mm-hmm.
and the possibility of positive change.
So even though we live in a world that's marked by the effects of the fall,
Yeah,
we're not doomed to repeat those patterns.
exactly. We can choose to learn from the past.
Mm-hmm.
We can embrace forgiveness and grace
Right.
and actively work toward a future where those echoes of the fall
Right.
are met with a resounding chorus of redemption.
That's a powerful image.
Thank you.
It's a good reminder that even in the midst of all the complexities of life, there's always reason for hope.
Always. And speaking of hope,
Yeah.
there's one final aspect of Genesis 1 through 3 that we haven't touched on yet,
Okay.
the question of human purpose.
Ooh, that's a big one.
We've talked about our call to be stewards of creation,
Right.
agents of redemption,
Mm-hmm.
participants in healthy relationships.
Yeah.
But what about our individual calling?
Right.
What are we each meant to do with our lives?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll explore in part 2. Yeah.
Of our deep dive. So be sure to join us next time as we delve into this fascinating and often elusive concept of human purpose.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Welcome back to our deep dive into Genesis. Last time we talked about how Genesis 1 sets the stage with this amazing idea of intentional creation. Then in Genesis 2, we see how relationships are fundamental to human existence. And by chapter 3, things get a little more complicated with the introduction of sin and suffering. That's where we left off the fall and the ripple effect it's had on the world.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the fall, not just as a historical event, but like something that's still happening, like playing out in our lives today. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like, how often do you find yourself making choices that you regret or just experiencing like brokenness
Ugh, all the
in
time.
your relationships?
It's like we're constantly grappling with the consequences of those choices made way back in the garden.
Yeah, we are.
So how do we even begin to deal with this legacy of the fall?
It's a heavy concept. But remember that glimmer of hope we talked about?
Genesis 3.15, the promise of redemption. This prophecy pointing toward a future where the serpent's power is defeated.
Right, the seed of hope. It's like even in the midst of all that darkness, there's this promise of a future restoration. And for Christians, this points to the coming of Jesus and the ultimate defeat of evil. But even for those who don't subscribe to that belief system, the concept of redemption, I mean, it's powerful.
It is powerful.
It suggests that no matter how broken things become, there's always potential for healing.
Exactly. And that potential for healing is something that we can actively work towards.
I love that.
It starts with acknowledging the brokenness,
Hmm.
within ourselves and in the world around us.
So it's not just about recognizing the problems, but about taking responsibility for our part in them.
Exactly. And that's where this concept of repentance comes in. Repentance isn't just about feeling sorry for our mistakes. It's about like turning away from those harmful patterns and actively seeking change.
Okay, so how does this apply to our lives today? What does repentance look like practically?
Well, imagine someone who is struggling with addiction. They've made choices that have led them down this destructive path, and they just feel trapped. Recognizing the destructive nature of their addiction. That's the first step. And then comes the difficult but crucial work of turning away from those destructive behaviors and seeking help.
Okay.
This could mean therapy or support groups, or even just confiding in a trusted friend or family member.
So it's about recognizing the problem and then taking concrete steps to move towards healing.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual healing either.
Yeah.
It's about contributing to the healing of the world around us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like, think about social injustice. It's not enough to simply acknowledge that it exists. We have to actively work to dismantle the systems and the structures that perpetuate it.
So applying this idea of repentance on a societal level could mean working for legislative change, supporting organizations that are fighting for equality, or even just having difficult conversations with people in our own lives who hold prejudiced views.
Precisely. It's about acknowledging our own complicity in systems of injustice and then taking concrete steps to create a more just and equitable world. And it's hard work, no doubt, but it's work that aligns with this idea of redemption, of moving from brokenness toward wholeness.
That makes me think about another theme from Genesis stewardship. In Genesis 1, God gives humanity dominion over the earth. And it's often been interpreted as a license to exploit the planet's resources, but maybe there's a different way to look at it.
I think you're right. What if we see dominion not as domination, but as a call to responsible caretaking? If we are indeed made in the image of God, and God is a creator who cares for his creation, shouldn't we be doing the same?
So that means being mindful of how we use natural resources, taking action to protect the environment, and ensuring that future generations inherit a healthy planet. It's almost like we're being called to co-create with God in the ongoing work of creation.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it connects back to the concept of redemption. We can choose to participate in the healing of the world, both in our individual lives and in the larger systems that shape our society. We can be agents of restoration, working towards a future where the consequences of the fall are mitigated by our collective efforts.
That sounds like a tall order, but it's also incredibly hopeful. Even though Genesis 3 introduces these challenging ideas of sin and suffering, it seems like the overarching message is one of resilience and the possibility of positive change.
Absolutely. And in Genesis 3, just as we see the fall, we also see the first steps towards redemption. Adam and Eve, though banished from the garden, are given clothing and the promise of a future lineage. It's a subtle reminder that even in the face of difficult consequences, hope persists.
So you're saying that even though we live in a world marked by the effects of the fall, we're not doomed to repeat those patterns.
Exactly. We can choose to learn from the past, to embrace forgiveness and grace, and to actively work towards a future where those echoes of the fall are met with a resounding chorus of redemption.
That's a powerful image. And it's a good reminder that even in the midst of all the complexities of life, there's always reason for hope.
I agree. And speaking of hope, there's one final aspect of Genesis 1 through 3 we haven't touched on yet. The question of human purpose. We've talked about our call to be stewards of creation, agents of redemption, and participants in healthy relationships. But what about our individual calling? What are we each meant to do with our lives?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore in part 3 of our Dup Dive. So be sure to join us next time as we delve into the fascinating and often elusive concept of human purpose.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
In the last 2 parts, we really dug into some pretty profound concepts: creation, relationships, the fall, redemption, even the idea of repentance, on both personal and societal levels. We saw how Genesis, even though it's this ancient text, it still has so much to say about the human experience. But there's one big question we haven't really tackled yet. What does all this tell us about our purpose in life?
It's a question that's resonated with people for centuries.
Right.
And Genesis, I think, provides some really compelling insights, even if it doesn't offer this simple one-size-fits-all answer. You know what I mean?
Okay, so let's break it down. Where do we even see hints of purpose in these early chapters of Genesis?
Well, right from the start, in Genesis 1, we see that humanity is created intentionally. We're made in the image of God, which implies a unique purpose, woven into our very being.
So it's not just about, our physical likeness to God, but it's about inheriting those divine attributes
Exactly.
and using them in the world.
Yes. But then comes the fall, and things get a little more complicated. Our choices, the brokenness we introduce into the world, all these things kind of impact how we live out that purpose.
So it's like we're given this amazing potential, and then we have to figure out how to navigate all the complexities of a world that's no longer this perfect paradise.
I think that's a great way to put it. And that's where this idea of redemption becomes so important.
Mm.
As we align ourselves with God's plan for restoration, seeking forgiveness, embracing grace, allowing ourselves to be transformed by love, we begin to tap into the fullness of our purpose.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like the fall kind of throws us off course.
Yeah.
But then redemption helps us to find our way back to the path we were meant to be on. But, how do we actually figure out what that path is?
Well, Genesis gives us some clues. Remember when we talked about stewardship?
Uh-huh.
Genesis 1.28, it gives humanity dominion over the earth, which implies this responsibility for caring for creation. That's a huge part of our purpose, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Mm.
We're called to be caretakers of the planet, to use its resources wisely and protect it for future generations.
Right. And it's not just about the environment. That stewardship extends to our relationships with each other as well. We're called to love our neighbors, to build strong communities, and to foster unity, even in the midst of diversity.
So our purpose isn't just about, individual achievement, but it's about contributing to the well-being of others and working towards a more just and compassionate world.
Exactly. We're designed for connection, for collaboration, for working together to make the world a better place.
And then, of course, there's the idea of being agents of redemption. We talked about how the fall introduced brokenness into the world, but we also have the power to participate in that healing process.
Absolutely. Each one of us has this capacity to bring light and hope into the darkness, to mend broken relationships, to fight for justice, to offer compassion to those who are hurting. That's a pretty incredible purpose, wouldn't you say?
It is. It's like we each have this unique role to play in this grand story of redemption.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can be hard to see the big picture, when you get caught up in just the day-to-day grind. How do we stay connected to that sense of purpose?
It's a great question, and it requires intentionality.
Right.
It means taking time for reflection, for prayer, for connecting with our deepest values. It means surrounding ourselves with people who inspire us, who challenge us to be our best selves. And it means trusting that even when we don't have all the answers, God's working in and through us to accomplish his purposes.
That's really encouraging, even when we feel lost or uncertain, we can still trust that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as we learn to surrender to that bigger picture, as we align our hearts with God's heart, we discover a sense of purpose. And it transcends our own individual desires and ambitions. And we find meaning and fulfillment in being a part of something that's ultimately about love, about justice, and the restoration of all things.
That is a beautiful way to put it. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Genesis, what's the one thing you hope listeners will take away from our exploration of these ancient texts?
I hope they'll be encouraged to see that these stories, even though they're ancient, they still have something profound to say about our lives today. I hope they'll see that they're not alone in their struggles, and that there's always hope for redemption, both personally and as a society. And most importantly, I hope they'll be inspired to discover their own unique purpose, and to live it out with courage and compassion and this deep sense of connection to the divine.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder these profound truths and to discover how they might shape your own journey of purpose and meaning. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.